Welcome to Women in Politics, and this is Chapter 2. So let's get going. Today we're going to talk about suffrage versus ERA and feminism, and I'm hoping that this will also become a quiz if I can figure that out. I love this cartoon. Wonder Woman is also one of my favorite movies. So, what is feminism? Well, a lot of people today don't like to call themselves feminists. A lot of women think it has this negative connotation, but actually the book talks about it as a belief in equality defined not as sameness, but in opposition to ranking one sex above another. We're all the same. And that a woman's condition is socially constructed. And what that means is that it is part of the way one is treated in society, not a biological condition, not something preordained by God, but something socially constructed by society. And that a woman's socially constructed position situates them on shared ground. They are equal, enabling group identity or gender consciousness that is sufficient to mobilize women for change. Woohoo! Intersectionality. I'm sure you've heard the term, and this draws attention to various types of discrimination. For example, Shirley Chisholm, African-American Congresswoman, first African-American woman to run for president on the Democratic Party ticket. She said that she was discriminated against more as a woman than as an African-American. So you can have many types of discrimination at the same time, and it makes your situation a little different. So let's talk about types of feminism. I used to teach this class where there was just mainstream versus radical. And there's actually quite a bit more. Life is really much more complicated. So the first one we're going to talk about is liberal feminism, mainstream, old school, individual autonomy over aristocracy, and rational thought, something that Mill talked about in Wollstonecraft, that women are rational and education is the great equalizer. And just a belief that basically women need the basic rights, education, voting, through the traditional means, the courts, mainstream means, courts and laws, getting elected, all very important. But number two, if you ask the radical feminists, they'll say, we need a revolution, a total revolution. We have to overcome patriarchy, patriarchal hegemony. It's not enough to change the laws. It's not enough to get elected. You have to change the way people think. And they believed that we have to change society, language, culture. So they did some radical things. Now, you don't have to pick one. You could say, you know what, I think we need to do both things. But maybe you consider yourself a Marxist, socialist feminist, and you believe the economic system is what needs changing because you can't have feminism where you have capitalism. If so, you're a Marxist socialist feminist. So these you can pick and choose. Maybe you pick a few, maybe you pick one or two or just one, but it's not like you have to join a camp and then stay there. Global feminism. Number 4, global feminism. Colonialism and nationalism. Colonialism, that's where we colonize other countries, take their resources. Nationalism, America first, have divided the world into the have and the have-nots. And a global feminist says, you know what, let's look at the rest of the world. Yes, we have problems here, but they also have problems where women get stoned to death, or they can't drive, or they can't vote, or they can't get an education, or they're raped and they're blamed for it. So if you think of us as a global community, it's not just oppression or discrimination. There's a lot of things going on around the world. And we are complicit because we have multinational corporations around the world with very bad labor practices. They often flee the United States so they can get away with things. Black feminism, also known as multicultural feminism. So the feminist movement, there was a bifurcation. Actually, many gay women didn't feel they were part of the original feminist movement. Also, Black women complained that, women in the 50s were talking about, we're tired of sitting at home, we want to work, or we want to become CEOs. And a lot of African American women were like, we just like to have a job where we're not taking care of people's children or cleaning house, or, wasn't that long ago where we were working for free. So, you have a very different experience. So there's intersectional oppression. There's gender feminism, and the idea is that the root of women's oppression is in biology, psychology, and culture. Different. We are different, they would say. They would say some of the traits attributed to women, like they're nurturing, at least the stereotypical idea that women are nurturing, it makes them superior to men. Their moral development, their ways of knowing and thinking. So if you think that a woman is actually preferable or superior, then you might be a difference feminist. Third wave feminism, number 7. Okay, I'm not going to test you on the waves because people argue over third waves, fourth waves. Some people think that we actually have a fourth wave now, and different times for different things. The first wave is usually considered the beginning of the women's movement, 1848, and then the second wave is around the 60s and 70s. The third wave is around the 90s till the present, possibly. But basically, third wave feminism integrates women's issues with also issues regarding justice, racism, poverty, environmentalism, challenging the binary choices of just male and female. And they say gender and sexuality is fluid. Intersectional, we were talking about that before, the shared space between the second and third wave, where we're really not just dealing with just issues about women, but what about Black women? What about gay women? What about trans women? What about Title IX? It doesn't cover gay people, does it? Actually, the courts will decide that pretty soon. And if this is an old slide, then maybe they've already decided, if you're listening to this sometime in the future, the near future. Does it cover transgender people? So what does sex mean? It just says sex. It doesn't really encompass the completeness of human sexuality and gender identity. Okay, 1840. So actually, the women's movement is said to have started in 1848, even though we know there were feminists before then in the 1700s, Mary Wollstonecraft and Abigail Adams. But it was really thought to begin at that day in Seneca Falls, New York, when they put forth the Declaration of Sentiments. It was the Declaration of Independence, but it was rewritten. Instead of King George, it was about men. And also in 1868, after the Civil War, so we got in 1865, the Civil War ended. We got the 13th Amendment, ended slavery. We got the 14th Amendment. That was supposed to be a great thing for African Americans and women. They worked together. We got the Equal Protection Clause, and of course the Citizenship Clause, where if you're born in this country, you're a citizen. But oh my goodness, they added the word male for the first time, male, to say it was just about African American men, not women. And boy, they were really upset about that. And then an African American suffragist from Howard University, Mary Ann Shadd Cary, she said it can't possibly be just about men. That's crazy, because it's meaningless then, because obviously women were emancipated too. And African American women, although you don't always hear about them, when they put forward Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and various leaders of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, they don't talk about the women who did a lot of the organizing, a bulk of the organizing in the African American churches and the women's clubs. There was division over how far should we go. Should we amend the Constitution? Should we get the right to vote? Some women said, no, we should get rid of marriage too. Let's have free love. Ooh. What about prohibition? A lot of women worked on getting rid of alcohol, and they got that amendment passed. It wasn't in effect that long, but it did pass, even though people, as you know, still drank. But there was a reason for that. A lot of men would get drunk and beat their wives and spend all the money. So women were not all on the same page. Some women could vote before 1920. In fact, 1911, California let women vote. There was racism in the women's movement. Some feminists aligned themselves with racists so they could get the Southerners on their side. And the NAACP, very important civil rights organization, tried to get Alice Paul and other white suffragists to not affiliate with racists. Finally, 1920, women got the right to vote. Alice Paul and her organization conducted radical activities, hunger strikes. They went to prison, silent sentinels. Some of them died. But we got the right to vote. 1920, the 19th Amendment. And some women said, we're done. We're done. There was the battle between true women versus new women. And there was a conservative backlash. There was this fallow period. 1920, people say there was a fallow period until the radical 60s. Not that there wasn't a women's movement, but there was division about, what should we be fighting for now? Some women said we're done. And there was these conservative women, a sort of backlash where they said, you know what, we need women to be at home. And women wanted to pass the ERA. Ever since 1923, it was introduced into Congress every year. And finally, in 1972, Congress we got 2/3 votes of Congress. You got to get 2/3 of the House, 2/3 of the Senate. And they gave them 10 years until 1982 to get the second part, because to amend the Constitution, you have to get 2/3 of the House, 2/3 of the Senate, but you also have to have 3/4 of the states. And to this day, we did not ratify it. They gave up in 82, but it's coming back. But they needed 38 states. They only got 35. Why? Why? Because even women like Eleanor Roosevelt did not support it for 40 years. They thought that women needed protective laws. Women can have children. They need to be protected. They shouldn't have to work as hard or as long. They need to be protected. There was a big battle about that. We didn't know if we should be protecting women or just saying they're equal. So there was a conservative religious backlash. All right, we talked about this already. Phyllis Schlafly, there's a movie about her on Hulu. I want to see it. Hopefully by the time you hear this, I will have seen it. And Phyllis Schlafly, I call her the secret feminist because I believe she went to Harvard. She had advanced degrees. She had children at home. Her husband often watched the children. She traveled around the world organizing. political activist, but she didn't call herself a feminist. There was a big religious backlash because Roe versus Wade gave women the right to an abortion in 1973. There was that separate spheres argument. Women are in the home, men are in the public sphere. And they were very worried about women having to work, women not having the same privileges, women being in the military and combat, which they are. She worried about gender-neutral bathrooms, which we have, gay people adopting children, which they do. She thought it would hurt traditional values. People thought the ERA was going to be the 27th Amendment. It was not. It was not. The last amendment was in the 90s, and it had to do with Congress not giving themselves raises. But most people support the ERA. Over 90% support it in theory. We don't have women in the Constitution. I'll say that again. We do not have women in the Constitution other than the right to vote. Yes, women have laws. We have Title VII. We have Title IX. We have laws. We have lawsuits, Roe versus Wade, and many others. But they're not in the Constitution. And Justice Scalia, who died, a very conservative Supreme Court justice, said the 14th Amendment does not protect women. And it's hard to argue with him because it doesn't say women. It's dependent on the Supreme Court thinking it has to do with women. It's their interpretation, but it's not there in black and white, not unless the ERA passes. Women are subject to intermediate scrutiny. African Americans get strict scrutiny. It's a legal term. What does it mean? It means it's harder to win a lawsuit if you're a woman. It's much easier if you're discriminated against racially. Not that either one is easy, but I digress. Women still make about 79 cents, maybe 80 cents to a man's dollar. Women used to pay more for health insurance than men until Obamacare, which is also called the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act. There was a decision a few years back called Burwell versus Hobby Lobby. And that was Hobby Lobby was a craft store, a chain store, owned by a religious family. It's called a closely held corporation. And guess what? They said, we're not going to pay for birth control because we're religious. We don't believe in abortion. We don't believe in birth control. I can't explain that. You figure it out. I do understand. They believe that it makes women loose with their body. And we can't have that. So better they're pregnant, I guess. Anyway, let's discuss on page 69. You can get your book out. You can pause it and go to page 69. I'm not going to talk about it too long because you can read it. But there are 3 political lessons about gender equality. Number 1. Okay, so the battles waged to win suffrage have taught us 3 valuable lessons about achieving gender equality. Number 1, like I said, a change in social norms and attitudes must precede a legal change, especially if a constitutional amendment. You gotta change the way people think. If you don't change the way people think, nothing's ever going to change. And number 2, the role that states play in the pursuit of gender equality should not be underestimated. It's a very important lesson. States are different. They have different ideas. You got to think about that. State by state, you got to get them on your side if you're going to change the Constitution. And 3, all women are not alike. There is no sex solidarity in pursuit of gender equality. Phyllis Schlafly is a good example of that. A woman, working woman, activist, and yet she fought hard to make sure that women were not considered equal under the law. Not every woman believes in abortion rights. Not every woman believes in birth control. Some women think women should stay at home. I'd like to see them try to financially work that out if they don't have a wealthy spouse, but okay. Civil Rights Act, 1964. 1964 Civil Rights Act, very important civil rights legislation. It basically desegregated public and private everything. We got Title VII, dealt with employment. Southern conservatives thought by adding women to Title VII that it would die, but it did not. So women got added to the Anti-Discrimination in Employment Act. Protective legislation went away. So you're not supposed to have laws that are just for women. For example, that's why family leave is not just for women. Men also can take family leave. Okay, that's chapter 2. That's not the whole chapter. Of course, you should read it. I'm sure I'll include some test questions that are not here, but these are highlights. And if I can turn this into a quiz, I will do that. Thank you for listening, and I'm going to stop recording now and have a wonderful, wonderful day.